Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzir.
Isa.
This week we'll be talking about some of our favorite narrative fictional podcasts. Not podcasts where just two people sit around and gabber.
Much like this one, yes.
Much like this one, exactly. No, we'll talk about podcasts which has much better production values, storylines, actors, things of that sort. A bit of a return to old school radio audio dramas.
Oh, yeah.
It's coming back in the podcast realm now. And primarily, we want to focus on a local production called The Mercenário and The Pahlawan. We have with us a special guest, the creator, actor, star, writer of The Mercenário and The Pahlawan, Lian Sutton with us. Say hello, Lian.
Hey, how's it going?
We're doing well, man. I just listened to your podcast a couple of days ago, or the audio drama, should I say. Thoroughly enthralled. I binged it in one go.
Wow.
I did. I just, the cliffhangers, especially during Act 2, were quite addictive, so I just delved right into it. But we won't give away spoilers just yet. We'll ask some minor spoilery questions towards the second half of our interview with Lian here. But up until then, Lian, tell us a little bit about what The Mercenário and The Pahlawan is all about.
Well, essentially, it's about two warriors of opposing sides, and they come together in this amazing port city of Malacca in the early 16th century. One of the western side, so a Portuguese mercenary, and a local Pahlawan, a local warrior. And they kind of form this bond through dueling each other, essentially, or testing skills, as they call it in the actual play itself. And of course, amidst the political backdrop and everything that's going on and the impending doom of the city itself, which we know from our history books, or not, depending on your interest in it, or whether or not it's taught in your history books. But yeah, so that's essentially it.
Yeah, this is a very different kind of historical epic that I've never seen before, set in a setting that I've never seen or heard from before.
Yeah.
Isa was, involved somewhat in the behind-the-scenes process of this. So do you have any questions, Isa, for Lian?
Yeah, we did cover a fair bit in kind of behind the blade.
Beyond the blade.
Beyond the blade, yes. Oh God, I can't even remember. Where we sat down and chat with Lian. I sat down and chat with Lian, and together with Jamil Schultz and Faris Najid, who are the actors who play the titular characters of the audio play. So go and check that out if you guys are keen. You can get like kind of free. You get that free with the swag that you get on the Patreon page. Please go check that out. We'll have all the socials and the links linked in our description below if you're on YouTube or you're listening on Mixcloud. But just so you know, people who haven't gotten any of that, right, Lian, tell us a bit about kind of like the genesis of this, the beginning inspiration for this. Was it like a thought? Was it a moment? Was it a piece of material that you came across that kind of got you on the journey to writing The Mercenário and The Pahlawan?
Right. Yeah, I was really inspired by a Joseph Conrad novella called The Duel. Or its kind of more popular counterpart, which was a Ridley Scott film in the late 70s called The Duelists. And essentially it was about two soldiers of the Napoleon army, and through some sort of disagreement, can't remember what, not even sure if that was really important, but they start to duel each other. They challenge each other to a duel, and subsequently every time they met, they would duel each other. With different weapons, different settings, different rules, etc. And I thought that was really a great kind of premise to explore some of the dueling and the martial arts and stuff that we have from this region. I grew up doing a host of traditional Southeast Asian martial arts, and both my parents teach for a living, so it was inevitable. And I've always wanted to find a way to put these stories, right, these philosophies and sayings and all of the concepts into something, into a cohesive story that we could share with people on stage, or in their ears, or somehow through their senses, to take it in, because it's a very niche kind of knowledge. And that's part of what Nusantara Theatrical Combat is striving to do as a entertainment company. And and so I thought, okay, I need a premise. I want to showcase as many of these weapons as possible. And originally I started writing it as a sort of adaptation, and it became so loose I can barely call it an adaptation anymore. It was just literally like, the only thing that has stayed is that there are duels. That's it. They're not even really enemies. They become friends. So so that was kind of the beginnings. It started as a theatre play, and then, of course, realizing that this pandemic was going to go on a fair bit longer than we all had hoped. So then I thought, okay, what is the next best, cheapest, and most accessible medium? And I thought I would turn it into a radio play. Yeah,
excellent stuff. You started this project just before March 2020, when the pandemic hit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing it during the lockdown, but the kind of inception of the idea came probably 3 months prior. I got a really, really cushy job for about 3 months, and it paid a lot of money, and it gave me a lot of time while I was at the work to be able to read. And so I bought so many research books. I spent like a lot of money on these books that were historical, and that were, on stage combat, on different aspects of history and of this region, to look for a time and a place, essentially, to set this. And of course, early 16th century Malacca, it's actually 16th, 17th century Malacca. Once the Portuguese come, there's a lot of stuff written about it. There's local accounts, obviously, from the Sejarah Melayu, the Malay annals. There are Chinese accounts, because we had sailors, explorers, we had tradesmen from the north. There are obviously, the Portuguese wrote a lot about it, and there was just a lot of information that I could pull from, that I could read between and go like, okay, what is true, what isn't, who was here, who wasn't there, all this kind of thing, and kind of compile this story together. As we know, a lot of this region's history is oral by nature, so not many things have been written down. A lot of things have been passed on through songs or stories that were passed down verbally. So so to have all of that information, including the written stuff, really gave me a lot of inspiration to go, okay, I've got enough research here that I can't be, that I'm not bogged down by the fact that I, have to come up with this from thin air, because this is essentially my first time writing something of this length, and actually producing it to its extent. So I'm quite proud of it, I have to say.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think it's kind of mind-blowing, right? Like, we've been friends for a while. And I'm familiar with the work that you've done in theater and all of that. So to kind of like jump in this, when you sold this idea to Hidze and I, kind of like in the midst of it, I think, like, kind of after the first round of lockdowns was down, we kind of met up and hung out after we did the recording for Chris's Asian Nightmares episode. Yeah, and you were just telling us about that. Like, can you speak to maybe like what that process felt like for you, like in isolation, kind of like in lockdown, with all your books, and like trying to immerse yourself in this world where you had these two characters, and trying to bring them to life?
Man, it's just like, I mean, it's impossible to avoid talking about the kind of like mental and spiritual stuff you're going through at the time of the lockdown, right? So really, I can kind of credit this play as being something that kind of brought me out of the darkness a lot, because it gave me a focus. Like, I think I can safely speak for everyone here. We didn't have a lot of things going on, socially or financially or anything, and I needed something other than exercising to focus. To focus, kind of like feel like I'm actually doing something with my craft. So yeah, it was weird because I kind of put a lot of pressure on myself to stick at this, because I knew that if I didn't, I would go crazy, essentially. So in essence, I'm a bit worried now, because now that things are opening up, finally, I'm like, oh God, when am I ever gonna write again? Like, will I have the time now that things are happening, and all the discipline, really. But yeah, so I mean, these two characters almost spoke to kind of my psyche at the time as well. The it's always a I mean, without having too many spoilers, the essential thing is that they are one kind of comes from kind of a loyal, tradition driven culture, and the other from a more sort of similar thing. Same at the time, they would have all been come from that traditional, but the way I wrote it, the Western side is obviously a little bit more modern and a little bit more like focused on the individual and who they are and that kind of thing, rather than driving in the whole tradition and cultural stuff and those kind of things. And those are very much part of my own psyche as well. Like I have a lot of traditions in the martial arts that I practice. And I have to kind of figure out when I break away from those traditions to serve the art, or better yet, to serve the masses, essentially, the people. Because keeping the doors closed, or as we mentioned in the play, building the walls too high, lead them to have rocky foundations, essentially, and those walls will tumble. So I mean, I think unknowingly now, retrospectively looking at it, there was a lot of conversations I was having with myself, essentially, through these two characters.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I have a question that's kind of a personal one that I didn't get to ask when we did the BTS interview.
Ooh,
how much do you feel like your personal upbringing, right, and being kind of like steeped in the martial arts, right, came out through the writing of this audio play?
Oh man, I mean, it's pretty much all of it. I think if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have this story, essentially. Yeah. Because there were a lot of things inside that I included that were from actual stories I had heard about the martial practices, or stories about other warriors that I've put inside, and other things that I have heard that I've subverted. Obviously, the whole Hang Tuah story, which serves as such a big kind of world, right, in the Nusantara, and it's like such a big story, and to flip that on its head, to go like, yeah, maybe they weren't so great, and in the perspective of this character, I've yet to receive death threats from Malacca, but I'm deathly afraid I will. But yes, so it's, I mean, like, it's all peppered inside there, and what I'm excited about is for other people to either, if they know it, recognize it, or if they don't, actually wonder where these little things come from. The whole kind of Mercenario questioning the Pahlawan on their practices and what they do there, and their beliefs, are questions that I had growing up practicing these arts, and going like, questioning, why do we have this, why do we have that, and alternatively, the Pahlawan sharing these kind of cultural values and why they are important, why the rules, why no rules, why loyalty, why these things, all of these things are exactly the same when I start to teach my art to other people who have never encountered it before. So yeah, it's all intertwined in there. And I assure you, as much as I tried to put in, there are a hell of a lot more that I had to ultimately cut. But I really wanted to be part of this world, and probably will in the future. No, definitely will in the future. So.
Oh, okay. So we've got like verbal kind of like promise coming out from Lian here. Yeah. Let's dive into a bit of like the content bit here, and then maybe we'll jump back into more like the inspiration stuff later. His, do you have anything like kind of like just going through, the entire audio play for the first time? Anything you want to ask Lian about?
Yeah, it would have been easy for this audio play to be about the frenemyship, I guess, between the Mercenario and the Pahlawan.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been easily like this two-hander over the few episodes, and that in itself would have been interesting. But you weaved in so much historical detail, political intrigue, um, court intrigue, war, betrayal, etc., etc. How did those story arcs developed from your mind? You obviously started with the two protagonists, and then how did you decide to weave in all the political context into it?
Yeah, that's all the research basically. that
That was the
All,
research.
yeah, that was all the research showing up because I mentioned this before in Beyond the Blade as well, but it's worth mentioning here that the only characters that were entirely made up, as in from name to character to behavior, everything, is the Mercenario and the Pahlawan. Everybody else in the audio production has been at least mentioned in name, and I think there's only one person that's mentioned in name, and I know nothing about, and that's Irish Pereira, who's a minor character, a friend of the Mercenario. So everybody else has been mentioned in history books, either the Sejarah Melayu or the other books that I've read, the Albuquerque's commentaries and etc. So those were not those were I was just finding essentially where I was going to put these people and whether or not they, believe me, I did try to cut as many people as possible. But because it started becoming so cinematic in my mind that I felt the need to have this and have all that and to explain how the very personal beliefs and practices of these people are actually political and how they affect the decisions of everyone around them or not at all. Essentially. And I wanted to try my best to give a very balanced account of what was essentially going on. I mean, our history books, it always sides with the victors, right? Whoever writes the history books are the ones that are going to come out looking good. And so coming from Malaysia, then it's obviously going to be the Portuguese are bad. And of course, anyone that comes in and colonizes them is essentially bad, but it is a part of history that all of us colonized or were colonized at some point. And there was that, and there was also what was going on in the actual courts as well in Malacca, which is actually clearly mentioned in the Malay annals. That it doesn't paint the Sultan in a very good light, and that also has its reasons, right? Why is it you're going to talk about your leader in a bad way? It's probably because they want the people to, have a bit more control maybe, or think for themselves a little bit more. So there was a lot of these things that I felt it was only right if I told the entire thing, that I told the setting and let Malacca also be a major part, another character essentially in the entire story. Because again, it's not, we don't hear much about 16th century Malacca, and we certainly don't see enough of it as well in our popular media as well, when it was actually a port city to be emulated and change the way the Nusantara conducted itself. Even after Malacca fell, all of the other port cities around in modern Indonesia, all this kind of Sumatra, all that, they all tried to emulate Malacca essentially, because it had such good laws that were fair for trading, the taxes, the use of the Malay language as its lingua franca, essentially, and all that kind of stuff. So it was to be admired, and I was just baffled that it isn't told more about, essentially. And so that needed to happen. And I wanted people to get a big, epic picture of how great this city was.
Yeah, that's the part I actually loved the most about it. You see a lot of these kinds of historical fictions in, say, medieval Europe or feudal Japan or ancient China and things like that, but I've never seen it in such a specific context, so close to home here, in Malacca, specifically here. another question I wanted to ask, and this is minor spoilers here. But I won't reveal what the spoiler is.
Yeah.
But like, how early on was the decision to make the narrator such an integral part of the story?
Yes, I have a follow-up question to that. So let's go.
Oh, I definitely it came out of practicality, right? It came out of I really needed, this is an audio medium, and I can't do this without the description and everything, and I needed the voice, my voice essentially, to be the clearest, because that is, it was written entirely. There was no, I wasn't trying to put any characters there. Essentially, eventually the actor that played the character, I literally had to tell them to go and make it their own, essentially, because because I wrote it so specifically to my voice. But yeah, it was born out of practicality. I needed someone to be able to describe what was going on, but I didn't want it to be someone that wasn't connected to the story in any way, shape, or form. You know, I didn't want it to be just someone reading, or someone that had it needed to be there for a reason. They needed to be there for a reason. And how do I explain this without spoilers? and I really felt that there is absolutely no way I can answer this question further without reaching some sort of spoilers.
Yeah, so at this point, we're going to give our spoiler warning, guys. Again, spoiler warning for that, just so we can open up the conversation a little bit. Mercenário and Pahlawan is available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, as well as Apple Podcasts as well. It has been out for since the 31st of March. All 6 episodes are there in entirety and glory. Please go check that out before you check out the rest of the podcast and spoil yourself. But if you're not concerned about that, Lian, you can continue. We've given a spoiler warning.
Brilliant. So what was different was that the main difference was that it was originally a man. It was supposed to be a man that was speaking. It was probably going to be me. And the decision I made to change it to a woman, which was a kind of half-baked attempt at some sort of move towards equality, essentially, because I realized that this production was a sausage fest and it was all guys, and yes, history is, you know, his story and all that stuff, and I was trying to go like, okay, how do I make a more balanced storytelling instead of just injecting a female character, or completely changing someone from a traditionally in the history books a male character into a female character, and I didn't want it to be sort of like tokenist in a sense, or just for the sake of being there. So it was actually, I credit my father for giving me this idea. So then why don't you just make the narrator a female? And then I thought about already the connection between Awang and the narrator, and how Awang becomes the narrator, becomes the immortal narrator, essentially. And then I had this whole thing, okay, well then I will just make Awang someone who's trying to pretend to be their brother, because they believed that to be strong they had to be male, so they would pretend to be a man, a boy, until and so that they can survive in this world, essentially. So then that thread came pretty quickly. As soon as I made that connection, I was like, okay, so it's going to be this young boy. However, how it came that this young boy had such a big role in the end of the play, really was kind of, I can't describe it in any other way than like fate. You know, it was just, it just suddenly presented itself to me that this young boy should be Malacca, should be the thing that's left, should be the thing that they trade for. And I talk about this in Beyond the... I apologize, I do ramble a lot. But
that's okay.
But I'll keep going. I explained this in Beyond the Blade as well. But the moment where everything clicked for me, where I realized what this play was about, it wasn't just about two people dueling, about contesting views, all this kind of stuff. And I actually have a voice note of it on my phone. in August. Was it August or October? October 2020. I was walking down the street and I realized, and I was like, I have to say all of this out loud to myself on my phone as I'm crossing the road quite dangerously. And it was a discovery that actually everything is about trade. The idea of the entire play was about a trade of something that is not material. It's an immaterial trade. It's the trade of languages, of skills, of art, of ideas, concepts, beliefs. Basically what the Mercenary and the Pahlawan had been doing all along, and what everybody else kind of could not do because of the powers that be, because of power, essentially, people wanting power, people wanting the material goods. And so I thought, okay, this is it. So in the end, they have to make a final trade, and that trade is for the life of the next generation, essentially. So this happened a lot, by the way, this kind of like kismet thing. This, like, I was going through research and I'd be like, oh my God, this has to be in the play. This makes sense. This can be here, you know?
Yeah. So
I saw you had a follow-up question.
Yes, so
right?
I have a follow-up question to this. And again, guys, this is going to major spoiler territory, right? So Lian, at which point in time in the writing process did you decide that you wanted to introduce magic into this world?
Oh. when I don't even know if I can answer this question, because if I think about the decision I made and when I made that decision, then this is how I can perceivably remember it, essentially. It all started when I was reading the Albuquerque's commentaries, and the Albuquerque had mentioned this little side quest on his way to taking Malacca, where he literally bumped into, and it sounds just like that, this character, this person called Naoda Begia. And the way it's spelled, Naoadabega, and it's different versions of it. I have a theory that his name is actually Begia, and the Naoda part is Nakoda, which is captain. I have a theory that that's what it was, that they heard him call it. Anyway, that's a little trivia for all you history nerds out there. But essentially, this side quest, he catches up to this disgraced Laksamana, essentially, or this person who had fallen out of favor with the Sultan and needing, wanting to get favor back. He was on his way back to Malacca to warn, right? And then it goes into this part, completely literal, they all believed what he was saying and seeing. He could not kill this man. Every stab wound, every cut, no blood would expel from his body. And it was believed that he had some sort of magic talisman with him. And it was only when he took the talisman off that the man bled and died. So imagine my surprise as reading this, because you expect this in your kind of Eastern historical texts and stuff like that. The fantastical and the real are very much intertwined, and they're no difference from each other. Magic is real, and that is stated as a fact. But in this book, where everything else has been fairly kind of methodical and dare I say even a little bit scientific, it suddenly mentions this, and then he keeps the bracelet, right? De Albuquerque, he keeps the bracelet to eventually box up and as a gift to the King of Portugal. Of course, that all gets lost in a shipwreck, which is the shipwreck of the Flor de la Mar, the Flower of the Seas, the boat that he came on, amidst a lot of treasures and books and stuff that rightly belonged in this region and came from this region, which is very upsetting. But yeah, so as soon as I read that, I was like, okay, I gotta find a way to put this into it. And then all my ideas came about, like, why shouldn't there be magic in this world? Like, magic exists, all right? Yeah. Everything is magic, and it should be there. But I didn't want it to be like, oh, this huge thing. I got really worried after I got this idea and I started writing it, because then I went, oh God, is this going to be Awang and the Magic Bracelet? Is this the play I'm writing? Is it going to be that? It's a children's book, essentially. So I kind of let it happen in sort of the background. Even as it happens, it doesn't play a pivotal role in anything other than it sets up the narrator to be able to be talking from modernity. And I hope that came through somehow, and we tried our best. But essentially, that the narrator was telling this story in modern times, trying to go back to Malacca, hasn't been for 500 years, and essentially can live forever, has been living forever, and therefore is able to see everything in a different light. Yeah, so that was kind of the impetus for this kind of magic entering this world.
Fascinating.
I didn't add anything more than that. I didn't want it to be even more magical. We do kind of like talk about it, kind of the magic of the Chris, the power of certain weapons, the kind of internal energy and powers that the Pahlawan has from his training and things like that. But it didn't feature heavily. It wasn't like people were throwing fire at each other and stuff like that. Not yet, anyway. Maybe that's how we get this one.
Yeah, I sort of have like a technical, I guess more of a writing question, because most of the audio podcasts that I listen to, specifically the narrative ones, have been more intimate or dialogue-driven type of stories. Besides the historical scope of this story, which makes it unique, it's also predominantly an action or combat-centric story, which is, you would think, is a visual medium. How challenging was it for you to translate the urgency and immediacy and viscerality of combat and action and fight scenes into words, into an audio drama?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I fully realized the weight of essentially that question when I was doing it. I kind of always just imagined that the imagination of the people hearing it and the sound effects would build the world in their minds just as it does in a book.
Right.
Except we can do sound effects and stuff like that, which a book can't, essentially. And the fights were probably the hardest. I mean, the simple thing is with stage combat stuff, right? It's actually you've got to, every fight has got to have a reason. There's got to be a reason why they are fighting, and of course you don't fight and speak at exactly the same time. That's one of the things. Otherwise, it gets too messy, right? So I had to find out a reason for each of the duels, and then have the massive battle scene, which was a hot mess experiment, essentially, of my part, be the main drive forward to the Portuguese coming, essentially. But yeah, so each fight, and actually it was the conversations in between that I was trying to focus on more, because I knew that I couldn't have the fantastical kind of like swashbuckling stuff. I could literally just have clang, 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 clang a few times, and then someone speaks, clang, 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 someone speaks, right? But yeah, I think a lot of it was I hope that I gave a lot of trust to the people listening to kind of build up the fights in their mind. When I was working with the sound engineer, there were times when I was like, okay, the consistency or the closeness of the clanging sounds for this fight doesn't sound right. It goes too fast, too quickly. They start kind of fighting very quickly, whereas then there's nowhere to go later on after, when they get to the second beat of the fight. It just stays the same. So there were moments like that where I had to work out with the sound engineer what was possible and how we could do it. And thank goodness they were very intuitive that there wasn't really much that I needed to change. What was the hardest, I think, was things that I could no longer change, like the actors' speed of their lines, right? That was the hardest thing, because we recorded everything in 3 days, and out of the 3 days, there were maybe 2 days that had everyone there, and 1 day where we were left with very few people. The only thing we could do were incidental sounds, so we ended up like riding horses and making and all these kind of shouts and grunts of it, which was endlessly fun, but terrifying for me, because I was like, oh God, tomorrow we're going to have to shoot the entire second act in 4 hours. How are we going to do this? And stuff like that. So, and trying to direct for the first time as well. And then asking, one thing that I felt very strongly when we were recording was that everything needed to be paced up. There needed to be a lot pacier, especially once we get to Act 2. And the downtimes were very simple, because the downtimes were just literally when it was the two of them and they were talking to each other and they were exposing their truths, essentially. So yeah, I mean, I honestly can tell you I have no idea if it succeeded or not. I think it did. I felt like I enjoyed listening to it. But there was a lot of trust and hope, and perhaps I would dare say a little bit of naivete or ignorance to just go, yeah, this will maybe work. I think, because I have no reference either. I didn't go off, and the one thing I didn't do, and I think I did it on purpose, was not go and listen to a whole bunch of other audio plays or audio productions, just so I could nosedive into it and fail epically or not. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find audio productions or audio plays with this amount of combat and fight scenes, because they're just so rare. I think.
Yeah.
There's a fight scene in at least one in every act, or in every part of your 2 acts in the Mercenário and the Pahlawan, and I found that astounding, because I think it worked. I think I was immersed into it. I was amazed that I was able to intuit the geography and pace, who was winning, who was losing, etc. Just from the various sounds and the little that the narrator gave us. So yeah, kudos on that. That was the one thing I really wanted to ask you about, like, how do you frame the combat scenes? Any last questions from you, Isa?
Yeah. Maybe just one more before we wrapped up. Lian, was there ever a version of the story in your mind that did not have the two titular characters establish the friendship that they have?
No. No, I don't think so. In fact, maybe they were not so quick to kind of form a bond. But they would always end up forming a bond in the end, because there's one thing that I was very clear about from the start, and this had been, drilled into me since I was a kid. I can literally hear my father saying these words as I go into the cinema to watch another wuxia film or a new kind of epic on Asian kind of martial culture and stuff like that, is that the heroes always die. Doesn't matter if the bad guys die or not, that's irrelevant, but the heroes, they must die. And so that was the main thing that I knew had to happen, that the two of them would die. How they would die, whether they would die fighting whatever they're supposed to fight, whether they would die killing each other, was something that was later on developed. But I wanted there to be a friendship quite early on, or build to quite a big bond, to make it all the more heart-wrenching and frustrating, because our heroes always die. And hopefully then that will... I always thought that the reason why that is so it jolts us into becoming our own heroes. It jolts us to go like, yeah, but we can't rely on Superman. Superman's dead. How do we be Superman in our own lives? You know what I mean? So that was something that had to come through, and I felt like the only way that could come through is if the both of them kind of showed two sides of the same coin, and recognized the fact that they were the same.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, I particularly enjoyed the final fight because of, like you mentioned, the stakes in it and the personal stakes in it, the friendship between the two. They died fighting, but fighting for friendship. It's bizarre, but I loved it. Yeah. So much about this gripped me for the 4 hours, 4 odd hours ish that I was listening to it, and I urge you all to do the same. As you mentioned, right, it was on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all the usual podcast things
Yep.
that you find audio dramas on. Just search for the Mercenario and the Pahlawan. You have a Patreon as well, right?
Yeah, we do. We have some amazing merchandise, all designed. We've got bookmarks, we've got posters, we've got behind the scenes interviews. You can download the entire audio epic on your own device if you wanted to. And we also have a historical reader, like a 60-page book of all of my research, essentially. So if you listen to it and you're kind of nerding out about the history and stuff like the characters, and you're wondering, was this real? Was it not? You can get that because it's all written inside in this rather dry historical reader, but nonetheless very interesting if you're into it.
Yeah, at the end of all fantasy books, there's like 100 pages of indexes right at the back.
Yeah.
And this is it. And oftentimes the indexes are sometimes my favorite bits of the book because it's so much of the world. And in this particular case, the world just happens to be real, which makes it so much better. I mean, I'm looking forward to what you do next, Lian. Particularly if you want to do a sequel or a prequel to this. I'll be so down for that. I mean, I particularly enjoyed the father-son relationship between the Mercenario and what was his name? The Albuquerque? How do I say it right?
Yeah. I mean, there's the English way of saying it, and then there's the Portuguese way of saying it, which is impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
While we're on that, do you want to tease like any kind of future upcoming project? What's next up for you? What's up for Nusantara?
Oh, there's a lot of stuff that I want to do. There are stories that I want to write, and I have plans to make this into a trilogy, essentially. Whether or not it will stay in this medium is something that perhaps I do not want. So it might become a stage production into something else, a different story, or it might become an exhibition or a painting or a graphic novel or an album. But either way, I want to keep this world building and keep the magic going, essentially, because I think it's an important story. And there's a lot there to tell. So, yeah, look, check it out. Nusantara, we're gonna do things.
Definitely. You guys are on the usual socials, right?
Yeah,
Facebook, Insta, and all.
Instagram. Yes, the only thing we're probably not on is TikTok yet. So, but yeah, maybe akan datang.
Maybe.
I mean, that will be interesting too. TikToks are made for short physical things,
right?
And you guys are a combat theatrical company, so why not?
That's true. Yeah.
I would sign up for TikTok for that.
Okay. You heard it here first.
I'll keep that in mind. I'm gonna start drafting some things I can do on TikTok.
All right. Thanks so much, Lian, for joining us.
You.
Any last words, Aisa?
No. But Lian, like you usually open and close every episode for that. Maybe you want to close up this segment for us with your usual ritualistic closing. Yes.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'd like to take this moment for all of us to give respect to the voices and the people who were and were not, who are and are not, who will and will not. In the name of the creative force that is the I within, may the strength of our spirit and spirit of our practice make this a sacred space of safety, power, and peace. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lian.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lian.
No worries.
And that was our good friend, Lian Sutton, the creator, writer, director, star of the historical audio drama, The Mercenario and The Pahlawan. If you're interested in listening to that podcast, that narrative podcast, we've provided the links down below to listen to the episodes, or if you want, you could also support Lian Sutton and crew via his Patreon page, which we will also find a link in the description below.
Yeah.
And now we are back with Isa Fong. Say hi say hi, Isa.
Hi.
Yep. And continuing the theme of narrative podcasts, of fictional audio dramas, we're now going to briefly talk about some of our favorite narrative podcasts out there, particularly one that I've been following for a very long time. My Dad Wrote a Porno, alongside Welcome to Night Vale, which is more in line with our sci-fi fantasy leadings over in genre equality.
Yeah.
But let's begin with My Dad Wrote a Porno, which is, man, how would you describe My Dad Wrote a Porno? I'm going to try.
Oh man, I would say it's an audio book with critique built into it.
My Dad Wrote a Porno, as its title is aptly describes, is a podcast where a TV writer by the name of Jamie Morton reads and reviews an erotic novel that his father penned under the pseudonym Rocky Flintstone.
Yes.
Each episode focuses on a single chapter of said novel. It's now a series of novels as the show has gone on. And Morton hosts the podcast with two of his friends, namely James Cooper and BBC Radio 1's Alice Levine. The format sees Morton typically reading the chapter beforehand, while Cooper and Levine will be hearing it for the first time live during the podcast when Morton reads it aloud. And the three of them then review and dissect the chapter in the erotic novel from the series entitled Belinda Blinked, all of which was, of course, written, and again, I can stress this enough, by Morton's father. If you are curious about Belinda Blinked, it was and is still a real erotic novel,
Yes.
published and all, which luckily for My Dad Wrote a Porno grew into a series of novels, providing endless amounts of content for this podcast. And Jamie Morton started recording this podcast after his dad, famously, as he's told the story many times, pulled him aside at a holiday dinner to share a few chapters from a book he had been writing. He had been writing, as I said, under the name Rocky Flintstone, and he had been writing it in his shed because his wife, Morton's mom, would not allow it in the house.
Yeah.
After a quick read through, Morton realizes that his dad was in fact writing a porno. It all sounds made up, but it's not. All of this makes for a hilarious format and equally hilarious material. And a lot of the funniest parts in this podcast wouldn't strike the same chord if you weren't aware that, again, Morton's father wrote this. And as with a lot of successful comedic podcasts, the content is hilarious, but the theme and the format are two, which makes it great as well. Because I think Levine and Cooper, their incredulity towards what is being written adds a lot to the dynamics of the podcast. So if you're looking for a new comedy podcast to check out, I definitely recommend My Dad Wrote a Porno. This was recommended to me about, I'm going to say 6-7 years ago by our friend Raihan. Shout out if you're listening. And I'm still listening it today. In fact, it's become so successful that they've taken the show live. They've gone on live tours to read out exclusive chapters in stadiums. They've been selling out stadiums. They have a HBO special out there, comedy special. So it's become way more than a podcast these days. What about you, Isa? Like, how were you introduced to My Dad Wrote a Porno? How far have you gotten into it, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I remember a couple of conversations where Raihan was telling you about that, or the two of you were just kind of discussing the newest episode that came out. But until review this time around, right? I actually had never dipped my toes into it. That being said, I spent the better part of 2.5 weeks just binging this.
Nice. Are you on season 2, 3? 4?
I'm about to finish season 2.
Nice.
At the moment, right? But yeah, there are moments in time because at home when I'm like just doing whatever, right? I'll put it on and all of that. It's a little hard to listen to with family at home.
Of
so
course, you gotta have headphones on. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta have your headphones on. Please, guys, wear your headphones.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I've been listening to it mostly on transit, and there are moments in time where I think my palpable reactions to that is visible to my fellow commuters.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like wanting to burst out in laughter or like being aghast at the things that are being written.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's made for its own fair bit of comedy. The listening experience has been made for its own comedy.
Mm-hmm.
But I've thoroughly enjoyed it because it is so absurd and so funny, and it feels like totally natural and emergent from the reaction of the cast just responding to that. Oh, but
Mm.
man, like what a ride! It is really really just quite something.
Yes, yes, absolutely. If you're wondering what a typical episode sounds like, it is okay. Here's the plot of Belinda Blinked. Plot is very a loose term for what happens in Belinda Blinked because it is not just a porno. It is also a deep dive into a company that makes pots and pans. There is a whole subplot about English royalty that comes in later on.
Yeah.
Belinda Blink goes on a globe-trotting adventure as a spy for MI6 later on. So it's more than just a porno, but in the bare bones plot is it follows Belinda Blumenthal,
Yeah.
who is the new international sales director for a company called Steel's Pots and Pans. Belinda has a certain way that she goes about pleasing her clients and making sales, and that way is inevitably sex. And the sex isn't necessarily the titillating part
Oh no.
of the book because the sex is so bizarrely written, and in fact, it is the amateur writing style of Rocky Flintstone and his uncomfortable depictions of human anatomy. Uncomfortable is not the right word. Inaccurate is the word
Yeah.
of in depictions of human anatomy. The and random like detours into chit chat involving sales, strategy, and jargon
Yeah.
that seems so out of place in a porno that makes Belinda Blink a story unlike any other. And Morton usually can't read more than one or two sentences in a row before at least one of the trio either laughs, cringes, or asks a perfectly legitimate question about the descriptions of anatomy, like how can breasts be pomegranates, or what part of the body can be compared to rivets on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Um, who is the youngish man? The novella itself is short, and so are the chapters. So
Yeah.
analyzing just what the hell is going on in the plot, if we assume there is a plot, makes up much of the conversation. There are also tons of really really great footnotes episodes in which the gang discusses things outside of the book itself, including Rocky Flintstone's biography,
Yep.
who would star in the actual movie. Lots of big actors have come on to describe themselves as fans of the show, such as Michael Sheen, and so on, who are such big fans that they are calling who they want to play in the eventual Belinda Blink's movie. Do you ever listen to the footnotes?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I think like I live for the fact that they came on board. Elijah Wood was really funny with just,
Elijah Wood, yeah.
with all of that. I don't think. Let me see. I think the last one that I heard was Daisy Ridley. Oh
Daisy Ridley, yeah,
yeah, is
from Star Wars fame,
of Star
if you
Wars fame.
remember.
It,
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
insane how much of a phenomenon this has become.
Mm.
And it's kind of like mind blowing.
Yeah,
to see.
Lin-Manuel Miranda was on. He suggested that he make the musical Broadway version of My Dad Wrote A Porno,
I,
which I would totally see.
I would totally watch that for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have like favorite episodes?
It's a bit tough, but my favorite episodes inevitably are the Christmas specials that happen at the end of the year because they are almost OVAs, if
Yeah.
you can describe it as such. They take place at a certain point in between books and often feature either a Christmas party or a Christmas getaway that devolves into sex and or spy craft sometimes. So much of it is difficult to describe because so much of it is absurd. There are bombs, there are gangsters, there's trips to Amsterdam and Germany, including the book's overarching villain. They have an overarching villain, mind you.
Yeah.
There are some chapters that just feature no sex at all, and just features Belinda Blink saving the world via steel pots and pans. It's great. So much of it is bizarre. If you know anything about human anatomy, you would probably be questioning the physics of some of the things that happens. But don't question it and just go along with the ride. You know, it's very funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like the fact that James and Alice like take the they are our stand-ins, right? They're the stand-ins for the audience itself, right? And voicing just their, I don't know, their disbelief, their discomfort sometimes on our behalf, and interjecting with the most hilarious kind of like protests or questions that I think as any of you who are going to be listening to it will also have on your mind. So that helps like a great deal. But I love the fact that, you know, three friends sitting around a kitchen table decided that they wanted to record one of their friends reading their dad's erotic fiction. To me,
Yeah.
like how popular this has become, how funny it's become, how much it has grown from just a very simple, bizarre circumstance is kind of mind blowing.
I mean, my favorite parts of the episode sometimes don't even involve what is being written, but rather some of the comments by the host and or Jamie Morton putting on accents for the various characters. Morton is not a trained actor. I mean, there's this whole inside joke that's going on because Morton used to be a theater actor for you know, like really fringe festivals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To which his co-hosts like to make fun of him. So he has some acting training, but his accents are admittedly as ridiculous as some of the as some of the pros, shall we say, you know. This is something that you can jump right in. You gotta binge it. It is surprisingly plot driven, to be honest. So the year-long breaks between each season sometimes makes me get lost. So this is something that benefits from binge listening. You would not assume a porno will be very plot driven, but Belinda Blix is very plot driven. There are like interweaving plots that seem to make sense, but they do in the end.
Yeah.
And I am sometimes like at Haas or impressed even by the writing of Rocky Flintstone in terms of his like long-term plotting. Any last thoughts on My Dad Wrote A Porno before we move on to Welcome to Night Vale?
Yeah, if you are new to My Dad Wrote A Porno and you're just hopping in, I'm gonna say that like just enjoy the ride. If you are used to if you're just used to better like audio fiction in general, like give it a chance. It will grow on you certainly. Season one noticeably doesn't have some of the things that we've mentioned. Like the plot isn't very open. It's a brief introduction into the world of Belinda Blink. Largely. So please give it a chance. Things do pick up. Things do become even more hilarious and astounding and incredible from there on end. So yeah, enjoy. I hope you guys check it out.
Definitely. Next, we're moving on to another long-running audio drama. The unique Welcome to Night Vale. It's a podcast that has taken the world, or at least the iTunes store, by storm.
Oh yeah.
The community radio broadcast from a fictional desert burg is as thoroughly strange as it is addictive. Yet it's easy to tease out its influences. Imagine if every Twilight Zone episode was set in the same city, and Night Vale is that city's radio news. You know, imagine if there was you were listening to some sort of news broadcast from Twin Peaks. You know? It's something like that. In either case, homespun weirdness is the goal of the podcast, and a big part of the fun comes from a huge variety of paranormal and supernatural experiences it features. There are aliens and secret government conspiracies. Surely the creators were fans of the X-Files when they were kids, but there are also, you know, random things like angels living in an old woman's house on the edge of town, mysterious hooded figures haunting a dog park. There is an underground city hidden beneath the pin retrieval area of Lane 5 at the local bowling alley. And there's a cat suspended forever in space above the sink in the station bathroom. Simply put, the canny and uncanny mingle so closely in Night Vale that the line between them just eventually disappears, you know. And creators Fink and Cranor play this mingling of the mundane and the mystical for laughs as often as they do for chills. And their knack for comedy, I think, saves the podcast from feeling too cumbersome or self-serious, like a lot of supernatural or horror podcasts do. And to their credit, Night Vale creators never forget that science fiction and camp kind of intertwine, you know. But to focus on the pop on the pop culture roots of the podcast, or its tantalizing play with the genre, is to miss its almost literary qualities. Fink and Krenor kind of admit to being scrupulous editors of each of the 100 or so episode scripts, passing back and forth many times during marathon editing sessions. And the voice of Night Vale, Cecile, played by Cecile Baldwin, pronounces each word with such care, such focus, that one can't help notice how hard the writers are just trying to find, poetry and prose from the story that they're trying to tell.
Oh yeah.
This is really, really great stuff. It is one of the best produced audio podcasts out there, and it doesn't tie itself to a particular genre per se. It is supernatural and sci-fi and fantasy and all that, but there's a weird mix of everything, so there is no homogeneity to the tone.
Yeah.
And some of the episodes, and a lot of them, can be listened to standalone, so that helps as well. What did you think about Welcome to Night Vale?
Well, I've been listening to Welcome to Night Vale on and off for a number of years. This was introduced to me by the dear friend of the channel, Christopher Falk, who we've had a number of times, and it's one of his favorite podcasts. And when he introduced it to me, I was a bit like, okay, this is kind of strange. I think like in the first couple of episodes that I was listening to, I was like, this is odd, right? Like I don't think at the point in time when Welcome to Night Vale came out, we had anything of similar format come out in the podcast space. So I was intrigued, to say the least, and it definitely grew on me over time, just because the world in which the world of Night Vale itself, right, begins to grow, and it begins to grow significantly. And I think the creators spend a lot of time making sure that there are these threads that, if you pay attention, you could probably you could follow, right, as the episodes kind of go by. So while it has this almost I don't know if episodic is the right word necessarily. While it does feel kind of like loose, and I will recommend you listen to it in chronological order, just because like you can tell, sometimes it's about the fog cloud, sometimes it's about the scouts and all of that. Like these little things begin to dawn and grow on you. And for a large amount of time, Welcome to Night Vale became the thing that I put on while I was doing kind of like busy work, right? Much like an actual radio show playing in the background, this was what it is for me. And every once in a while, something would catch my attention, or one of the threads would have been pulled that I had particular interest in. And every time they build on that, the world just becomes that much more rich and that much more fascinating, as they kind of fill out this world in an almost, I don't know, casual, I guess, a matter of fact manner, but it is often bizarre and absurd and disconcerting in the way that good sci-fi and all horror does. And it's all of those things, and it's a very easy thing to kind of like get into, but once you're in it, right, it becomes this vast world of strangeness that is scintillating in so many ways.
Yes, definitely, man. I'm probably not as deep into the podcast as you have been. I've only been listening to it like you have with my Dad Wrote A Porno over the last couple of weeks. But I've been enjoying myself greatly, and there's a wealth to get into here, because the podcast is running for 7-8 years now. It's similar to it's similar to my Dad Wrote A Porno. It's also been running for a similar amount of time. So if you want to binge it right now, if you're unfamiliar with these podcasts, take your time, man, because I, for one, am a bit kind of sick of true crime genre dominating the podcast arena. And I like seeing stuff like the Mercenário and The Pahlawan and My Dad Wrote A Porno and Welcome to Night Vale, among others, that kind of feature original stories. Of course, My Dad Wrote A Porno is not necessarily an audio drama, although it does feature a narrative, but it's not an audio drama per se. But I like hearing original stories and the return of old school radio dramas. It was a genre that, of course, I think most of the people in our generation and the next generation aren't too familiar with, because we didn't grow up in the era of radio dramas. But I did grow up listening to horror stories on the radio, like Mystery Jam 12 and things like that. And they're always fun. And you can do a lot of stuff while listening to this podcast. As Isa has just mentioned, you can do your laundry, you could do your ironing, you could be taking a walk, you could be having a jog. It's not the kind of it doesn't require the kind of focus that a TV show or a movie that or a book requires, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I mean, it's very soothing. Like Cecil's voice is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his diction is like close to perfect. That
Yep.
and the amazing kind of like sound design slash music that they
Mm.
have constantly going on in the background. Or one of my favorite segments, of course, being the weather report, which features like, just a song from an artist.
Yep.
Um, I've found so many like amazing kind of like songs and artists just from that segment alone.
Mm.
It is again, it is like a huge kind of world to kind of dive into, and please to take your
Yep.
time with that. Helpfully enough, if you are listening on Spotify, for example, they do have like a short trailer that explains to you about the name of the world of Night Vale, where to begin,
Mm.
what are the things that you could find if you're interested in catching recordings of their live shows that they do put online as well, or reading any of the novels that they've written. I think it's like 3 or 4 novels at this point in time. All
Yep.
of that they make available to you to find, and it's all linked there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite insane that stuff like Welcome to Night Vale and My Dad Wrote A Porno have spun off from their audio roots to
Yeah.
become audio-visual things. Their comedy specials, their novels, their actual books out there based on both these podcasts. Great stuff here. Those are the two that we're going to talk in depth about. But um, what are some of the other podcasts that you think you would like to give an honorable shout to, or an honorable mention that you would like some of our listeners to check out as
Oh,
well?
cool. I mean, like since we've already mentioned Chris along, of course, Chris's um horror fiction
Yes.
stuff that is on Genre Equality Channel, Asian Nightmares.
Mm,
I do know we will have a couple of more interesting things coming up this year, so stay tuned for that
yeah.
as well. And what else? What are the couple of ones that you've been checking out recently?
Recently I haven't really gotten into a narrative podcast. Not recently. I've been too busy for that with work and other stuff.
Yeah.
But over the course of my life, there is a podcast called Limetown, which I've really enjoyed. It's sort of a fictional version of Serial.
Yeah.
If Serial took place in the X-Files world, there's there's a lot of sci-fi and mystery to it.
Mhm.
Homecoming is probably one of the best podcasts out there in this particular form. It features a star-studded cast of characters, including Oscar Isaac, Catherine Keener, David Cross. It is a psychological thriller, unlike anything else that you've probably listened to.
Mhm.
If you have already binged it, you can also check out the show based on the podcast, currently streaming on Amazon Prime. It stars Julia Roberts in the lead role.
Mm.
Yeah, those are the things that I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
Anything else before we delve into recommendations for
Yeah,
this
for
one?
me, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of Actual Play D&D podcasts
Mm,
on various podcasting channels. The ones that I've been enjoying the most at the moment is NatPod, which is not another D&D podcast, which is run by Brian Murphy as the Dungeon Master, and features a cast mostly of college humor guys
yep.
who are on there. So I've been following that for a fair bit of time now. After discovering that they were doing that from Dimension 20, which we've covered before on A Different Behold as well.
Mm,
The most kind of recent one that I kind of started is called Dungeons and Daddies, where it's another Dungeons and Dragons game, and the premise is super simple, where a bunch of like stay-at-home dads have to go rescue their kidnapped kids, and it's an amazingly funny Dungeons and Dragons game that
yes.
is kind of all over the place, but is so fun to kind of keep up with. And I think those are the main two that I've been binging mostly since the start of the year.
Awesome. Okay. To cap off this episode, we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that have been catching our eyes and ears. Since we've already talked about podcasts, let's go back to the realm of TV and films. And I have a couple of recommendations for you guys this May.
Nice.
I'm probably going to be skipping the stuff that we'll be talking about in the upcoming episode of Genre Equality. So a lot of non-genre recs here. Stuff like Undone and all. I'll rave about it later on. But first up is something that is not necessarily a recommend unless you're already a fan of the series. Downton Abbey, the movie, part 2 is out right now. It's called Downton
Ooh.
Abbey, A New Era. Not pretending that it's high art or it's, super compelling or whatever, but Downton Abbey, A New Era is like the show. It's like a comforting cup of tea. Cup of warm tea.
Yeah.
It's not high art, but it made me laugh. It made me cry. If you're invested in the show, you'll be invested in the film, particularly because they are entering the 1930s now. So some of the older characters that you may know from the show may be passing or are about to pass. Next up, this is a real recommend. This is a documentary out on the projector right now. It's called Roadrunner, and it focuses on the life and times of celebrity chef slash journalist Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
It interviews his family and friends, and not not to say that it tries to unpack what happened in the lead up to his death, but it tries to unpack the restless soul behind the celebrity chef that we know. You get an intimate look at at a portrait of a very restless man, and it's kind of a what's and all kind of look. It's not just a celebration of Anthony Bourdain, but also about some of his flaws and foibles too. It really paints him as more of a human being, and I think that's how Bourdain would like people to remember him. He was um I don't know. He was important to me. I watched all his
Yeah.
shows, Parts Unknown, No Reservations, and all that. Have you seen Roadrunner?
I have not, but it is very high on my to-do list. I was a big fan of Anthony Bourdain. His passing
Yep. Yeah.
affected me a fair bit. Yeah, so I'm definitely going to be checking that out sometime soon.
Definitely. Also on the TV side, I'm gonna recommend We Own This City from the greatest TV author of all time. David Simon is back. He spent the past decade outside of Baltimore. He's done shows in Iraq about the Iraq War in Generation Kill.
Yep.
He's done a show in New Orleans about post-Katrina musicians trying to make it called Shami. He's even done an alt history sci-fi type of thing called The Plot Against America, which me and Hardy reviewed last year on genre equality. But now after 12, after 13 years away from Baltimore, he has returned to the area that has made him famous. Of course, he first wrote a book called Homicide: Life on the Killing Streets, which was adapted into a show called Homicide: Life on the Streets about Baltimore homicide detectives. And then he made The Corner, which was a mini series about a black family living in poverty amidst the open air drug markets of West Baltimore. And then, of course, his magnum opus was The Wire, which we ourselves have reviewed on this podcast, if you want to listen to it. He is back to tackle Baltimore police corruption in We Own the City. Shockingly, the stuff that happens in We Own the City is not fiction like The Wire is. The Wire is barely fiction, but this one is straight non-fiction. It's almost a docudrama about a particular scandal that rocked Baltimore post Freddie Gray, involving the Gun Trace Task Force. If you have seen the show The Shield, these are like the real life versions of that. We'll talk more about this a few episodes from now when we talk about some of the best TV of 2022 so far. Returning and stuff that we've already talked about last year, Girls Five Ever, the hilarious girl band sitcom about late 90s C-list girl band, an Atomic Kitten type thing, is back. Right now, its first 3 episodes are out. It remains just as funny as it was last year. Speaking of just as funny, Hacks is back, starring the great Jean Smart, about an aging comedian and her entitled millennial writer. Is back for season 2. Deborah Vance is now out on the road, taking her new material to test it out in front of new audiences. It goes disastrously, especially when Ava's email from last season's finale pops up again, and it destroys the friendship that they've built over season 1. Heck, season 2 is, I think, a bit more emotionally richer than season 1 even. It is less funny, but it's more dramatically compelling. So yeah, those are the recommendations for this month. What about you? Do you have any?
Yes, I'm gonna dive into a couple of anime I've been watching. Of course, we'll cover it more in depth for my anime corner a couple of episodes from now. But yeah, just shout out to 2 main ones. If you guys are not on the Spy Family train, please go and jump on that. One of my favorite mangas that has been going on for a while now, and I've been waiting for this adaptation since it came out. It is available on Netflix if you're in Singapore, and I believe in most places. And we are kind of like into the second arc at the moment, and it's hilariously funny. The art is so great, and the music is great as well. in addition to that, something that I don't know if Hits has watched yet, but I've been turning all my friends into is probably the most underrated and underwatched thing this season. It's called Ya Boy Coming. And the premise itself, if it doesn't stir you, you should just check it out anyway because it's really, really well written. Basically, Tukaliang from Romance of the Three Kingdoms gets transported, reverse isekai, I think is the correct term, into modern day Japan, where he is saved / meets a idol wannabe, a pop idol wannabe, and in the course of being both enraptured by her talent and her voice, and being intrigued at this new world that he finds himself in, he decides to use his legendary tactical genius in conquering the pop idol world. It is, I think we're halfway through the season at the moment, and I've been enjoying every moment of it. If you are familiar with Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I'm not familiar with it, but I was forced to read it as a kid. Just the way they kind of weave some of that stuff into the story is hilariously funny. So that's an added bonus for any of you Romance of the Three Kingdom fans out there. But I think more people need to watch this because it's very, very good. And the most underrated and underwatched anime this season.
Yes, definitely. One final recommendation before we cap it off. Top Gun 2, subtitled Top Gun Maverick, is coming to theaters in 2 weeks' time. It is, in my opinion, a perfect blockbuster. And this is going to sound ridiculous until you see it. I think it's going to be nominated for an Oscar next year. It is that good.
Shit. Really?
It is that good. It is Terminator 2 levels good. It is a return to old school blockbuster cinema. You know,
wow.
That era when stuff like T2 or Alien or Lord of the Rings could be nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
This is that. This is that.
God.
If you're a little sick of superheroes dominating your cineplexes, and you wanna kind of a return to the good old days of the 90s, where Tom Cruise does ridiculous things. Top Gun 2 is it, and it has a lot of emotional heft. Top Gun 1, I really, really love that film. It's not great. Like it's just not. But Top Gun 2 is. And this surprised me more than anything. So yeah, go check out Top Gun 2 in a couple of weeks' time.
Amazing.
Yeah. That wraps it up for this episode of Behold 49. We'll be back for Genre Equality 54.
Yes.
What are you looking forward to talking to about on Genre Equality 54?
Oh man. I mean, the big kind of news that we're going to be talking about is definitely going to be Doctor Strange and Moon Knight. Yeah, I would definitely want to kind of do like a deep dive into that. I think Multiverse of Madness, we are reaching an important kind of keystone in the MCU's timeline. Just kind of moving forward with the story, and I would love to kind of dive into that, how we found the movie, etc., etc. Moon Knight has been interesting. I think I would definitely have loved to see more, but as we know, Oscar Isaac isn't keen on coming back, which is unfortunate. And I think those are the two kind of like big things that that I am keen on just discussing.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Stranger Things is back for its 4th and final season.
Yep.
Just a couple of days before we record the podcast, so it'll be fresh on our minds. Love, Death, and Robots is back next week. For its 3rd season. I wasn't too impressed with season 2. Let's see if season 3 manages to recover some form. I know David Fincher is making his animation debut in season 3, so I'm looking forward to that. You know, he got no time for Mindhunter, but he got time for Love, Death, and Robots.
Yes.
Me and Hadi will be talking about the season 2 of Undone, which was almost a 10. Again, it's spoiler alert, it's close to a 10, but an almost perfect season. And again, proved me wrong because I thought they should have done season 2, but season 2 ended up being quite great. I'm gonna be watching this new anime coming out on Netflix next week called Vampire in the Garden. So I hope to talk about that as well. J.K. Simmons is back in the sci-fi realm after Counterpart. He is starring in an Amazon show called Night Sky. I have no idea what it's about, but it's J.K. Simmons. I don't think he picks bad roles.
No.
He just doesn't. You know, he has a good eye for a good script, and I think Night Sky might be really good. Plus, I'll be talking about The Time Traveler's Wife. If you remember the book from Audrey Niffenegger in 2003, and a really ill-fated Rachel McAdams movie in 2009. This show is an adaptation of the book, trying to fix what went wrong with the film. Let me tell you, it is worse than the film, but I'll delve into that later on. Hadi's gonna shit on Star Trek Picard, and I'll be revisiting Rosemary's Baby as well for this upcoming episode. Yeah, we're gonna be shitting on Star Trek Picard, but we are currently watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds right now.
Yeah.
Man, easily the best Star Trek show in like 20 years.
So I've heard.
Strange New Worlds is just a return to classic Trek. Episodes of the week, new planets, talking about, anthropology. It's fantastic. Yeah. So we'll delve into all that. Oh, and Hadi will be shitting on Halo as well.
Yeah.
Till then, guys, this has been Hitzer.
I'm Meister.
Goodbye.
Ciao.